Good morning, everyone, and Happy New Year. We're starting the new year with the very prominent expert in our field, Woody Zuill. Am I pronouncing your last name correctly, Woody?
Well, I'm sure that works, but traditionally we call it Zuill, like
Zuill.
in fool.
Okay.
So he's a fool, that Zuill.
Okay, yeah. So thanks for correcting me. I'm really happy to have Woody here today because I've been following, and Woody made a big, your research made a big impact on my professional life.
Oh, that's good to hear.
Indeed. And as you know, this channel that I'm kind of running with various experts, I call it Software Breakthroughs for the 21st Century. And we are keen on making some breakthroughs because I think we are a bit stale. I started my career and I'm influenced by the breakthroughs from the 20th century, which is extreme programming and test-driven development, which happened in the 90s. And of course, there are other breakthroughs before that. But in the 21st century, I think the most important, or the only breakthrough that I've seen, is mob programming, which I think is just the game changer. And so, thank you, Woody.
Well, you know, I'm glad that you're looking at it that way. You know, when we started working this way, it was sort of by accident. We weren't setting out to invent something new. I was more or less experimenting with this idea I've been using for quite a while in trying to improve the environment in which I was working. So we could go into details on that later, but part of that approach I was taking was, how can we learn what it is that we need to learn? In other words, we can go about learning things, but really a valuable thing to learn is, what do we need to learn? How can we expose the things that are going to be important for us to learn? And the team I was working with, we were taking an approach like that. We laid in front of ourselves all the things people were doing and trying to figure out where we could best put our time trying to learn how to make improvements. So, and that's something you need to investigate as well. Like, do we need to make improvements?
Yeah.
So, you know, it's like, it's almost a given that we need to, but I'd like to question, you know, anything we think we should do, I want to question.
That's marvelous. And another thing that I'm wrapping my head around, and is of course controversial, but I think has the similar potential power, is no estimates. Very controversial.
Yeah, so that it's an odd thing to me that it's so controversial, because in reality, I think that it's something we should always be thinking about. Any practice that we're using, are we using it for good reasons? Is it doing what we hope it will do for us? And the really even trickier is what we hope it will do for us, is that meaningful? Yeah. Because we do a lot of practices that we go, oh, we need to get better at this, so we're going to do whatever. But do we really need to get better at that thing that we want to get better at? Or are we tricking ourselves? Because really what tends to happen is we lock in on things that we think should be useful, and then they become rock solid for us because of confirmation bias and all these other biases we need to deal with. We tend to, you know, I think this is called like a theory bias, where what you believe should work becomes something you really want to prove will work. Instead of having a theory and saying, let's see whether it's true or not. Once we start doing it, I've seen this, a paper somewhere about this, this is a bias that scientists can have, that where they propose an experiment to do, but then they start trying to prove that this is something that's really important. Yeah. I'm not sure. I read a lot, and I only believe very small bits of it because I have no way to prove, but I like to get all the different ideas, you know, because it helps me think and not get locked in on something. So yeah, no estimates is really about questioning the status quo. Not so much about, I'm going to adjust my camera just a hair here. Not so much that we should or shouldn't do estimates, but that we should be investigating or paying attention to whatever the thing we are doing. Should we be doing that, or at least should we be questioning what leads up to us believing we should do that.
Yeah, and like any good, or I don't want to say revolutionary idea, but potentially, life-changing idea, it really sounds counterintuitive when you first hear it.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It's like, no, I mean, this is nonsense. Of course, we need estimates. But
so when I was young, and a new idea would come up, and I would go, no, that can't possibly work. Like I'm in my 20s or 30s, and I see somebody propose something that's contrary to what I already believe and want to do, and I see something come up, and I'm going, that can't work, and then I usually found I was wrong. Right. So after a few years, I'm looking back going, well, why didn't I think, that would be a good thing? One good example is when the computer mouse first came out. And I tried one, and a friend of mine asked me, what do you think? Is this going to be an important thing? I said, no, because you have to take your hands off the keyboard to use the mouse. But as my use of computers grew, I was using a lot of graphics programs and other things where a mouse was way better than using a keyboard to try and, let's say, do a design on a computer. So somewhere by the time I was in my 40s, I had learned whenever I hear something new that seems contrary, counterintuitive, I would immediately tell myself, this is one of those things you should be paying attention to. Because in the past, when you discounted them too soon, you usually were wrong. I don't like being wrong that much. Yeah. So I will listen to it. And there's a step beyond that. I try to get good enough at this thing to really be able to make a judgment instead of simply analyzing it or talking to people and so on. So where does that put me? I think in the diffusion of innovation, crossing the chasm, bell curve. I think that moved me more towards the maybe the early adopters as opposed to the early majority. So you know how that curve works. That there's the people who innovate, there's the people who are paying attention to what the people who are innovating are doing, and then there's the people who have to get enough information that this is working before they're willing to give it a try. I moved into that early adopters mode. So that's why when I heard about pair programming, the first time I heard about pair programming, my mind completely switched by that time from saying, I don't see how that could work, to, boy, I'd like to learn how that works. Let me try it.
Yeah. When I was young, I was a hot-headed, anything for anything, except anything that's innovative or new. And then one older colleague told me, like, you're one of these guys. We used to have them here in North America because I came from Europe. We call them pioneers, and usually they're lying down on the ground with the arrow in their back. Yeah. The cautionary tale. So I was always hot-headed, but I know what you're talking about. My aha moment came very late in life when I read Kent Beck was describing this newfangled thing called TCR. You probably heard of TCR.
Yeah.
And he said, one of his colleagues recommended it, and he says, it was so stupid, it was so not going to work that I had to try it. Because he said, if an idea strikes you as a really good one, I know somebody already did it, and somebody already made it work properly, but an idea that appears like, no, this can't work, I have to try it.
Yeah. And that's just a nice little technique to use to combat the biases and to combat the our preset beliefs about stuff. It doesn't mean we get rid of our biases. A lot of people think that if we're aware of the biases, or at least a lot of people I've talked to believe that if we become aware of the biases, we can eliminate them. But I think they're so deeply ingrained that we just need to be prepared to recognize we have them and see what we can do to counter them. And there's a huge list of biases. I don't know how many they've now identified, but a couple hundred, I suppose. So there's a lot to pay attention to there. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And that's given, that's human condition. I can tell you, I started my career as a scientist. I did 5 years of scientific research. And
cool.
During that, I became really interested in the philosophy of science, not just like the practice, right? And then, of course, you learn that the way to fight those biases is, I was reading Karl Popper, and he said that the only hypothesis or a theory that could qualify being scientific if it's falsifiable. Meaning, whatever you're proposing, you have to also furnish context in which a new evidence would falsify that hypothesis.
Ah.
So that kills your bias, because now you have to say, okay, but if we found such evidence, this invalidates automatically. Now this qualifies to be scientific, which means there's no personal bias in it, right?
So that would hopefully, yeah, but it's that even as a scientist, I'm sure, and I'm not a scientist, I'm not an academic in any way, but I would say that scientists are still just human, and so there's a lot. So I don't believe research. You know, if I see research and I read it, I say that just gives me some more things to think about and to consider, because I've seen research that then was reversed a few years later, and then that was changed a few years later. I really like to contemplate things like, how would my counterpart 12,000 years ago, how would he thought about this, or she? How would have they thought about this? Because according to everything I've read, we're pretty much the same beasts, just in a different environment. So I kind of like to eliminate all the stuff that I've learned. It put me back in this primitive state where all I know is the few things I've observed. Like, boy, it gets cold at this time of year, and stuff like that. So we don't have a lot. There's nothing I can read to inform me. Yeah. So I don't know if that's helpful to anyone else, but that's something.
No,
My older brother used to do this. He said, just picture you're in the least populated environment possible. You're on an island with 50 other people. How would you think about this problem when you're in that situation compared to here? I'm in a city with a couple 100,000 people and 3 million people nearby. So, you know, just put yourself in a situation where it changes your perspective. Mm-hmm. You know, it's funny, a lot of the way I do things is influenced by the people I grew up with. And so I often think about the things my father would have said. He was an engineer. And he used to say, there's 1,000 right ways to do anything. We must never think ours is the one right way. And whether that's true or not, I don't know. It's just, that makes sense to me. It keeps me from saying, yeah, here's what we need to do. You know, when it could be, boy, that's just one of many choices. Let's stay open. Let's be open-minded.
Yeah, and that's correct. Replace the way with the why.
No, I like that. Yeah.
There's more than one way to skin a cat, as the saying goes, but why are we skinning the cat?
Yeah, okay, that's like moving up the, so I think of this as a systems within systems, where whatever the system within which we do our work, that's within some other system, and that's within some other system. And usually, I don't know how far out that goes, but usually there's lots of other systems that are interacting. So there's almost nothing that's, you know, really truly isolated. We can't say, if this worked here, it should work there. That's just not something we have available to us. I don't think there's any way to prove those things.
But, you know, going back to science, the whole idea and how to, you're fighting, with science, we're fighting superstition, basically. Ah. Superstition is comes natural to us, spontaneous, effortless. Yes. Like you say, you see something happening, it's cold, and then all of a sudden there's a system that explains everything. And it's a complete system. Science is broken by nature. It is, whatever you propose and you've managed to prove it today, it's a tacit assumption, or it's just baked in that this is going to be disproved later. Like Newtonian physics was disproved by Einstein, right? We know that this is a temporary, limited.
Oh, I like that.
Solution, works for now, from what we know. There's going to be evidence, certainly, same as we discover microscope, we discover telescopes, revolutionizes how we understand our world. And we know in the future, there's going to be some other discovery that's going to completely change our mind about how we interpret the world and our place in the world. This is science.
This is good. And I would interject this. It's not based on what we know. It's based on what we assume about what we know.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, if we ever think that we really know something, that's probably a bias that we have to remind ourselves. Wait a second, I don't actually know this. I've been having some conversations with a friend of mine. We've been recording some things. And sometimes we'll say, well, that worked in those days, but it doesn't work now. And I want to reflect on, yeah, in those days, it probably didn't work that well either. It was within the assumptions of what we believed at that time. And like in business, a lot of people will say, well, this way of working with command and control doesn't fit so much the modern needs or the modern world. But I don't think the command and control ever worked. I think that it was always limiting our ability to make things better for everyone, to make it a better world. And so if our goal is simply to control something or to have certainty about things and so on, we're mostly, it's not a win-win often. It's not.
No, it's, we all have the need, as we are growing up, the need for the bedtime story. Tell me a bedtime story.
Yeah, there you go.
I want to go to sleep.
And maybe I still want to hear those stories, right?
Yeah, we're still in childhood, most of us, right? It's not easy to grow up.
Right.
But yeah, we have the need to come up with a system that absolutely explains everything. And this is metaphysics. Yeah. But we know.
No, go ahead. Please finish.
Yeah. And so science is brilliant because it just says, you know what, let's just be humble here. Let's be totally humble and say, we'll never know. We're like a fish who's trying to explain the ocean. The fish cannot explain the ocean.
That's right.
And we can make some theories and we can, do some practical things and fight this disease and prolong life expectancy and whatnot. But that's, we can't do much more.
Right. So if we learn some things and then we apply them and we get the results we're hoping for, that is a positive thing. It doesn't mean that it's completely proved anything, but what it's done is we've gathered some information, we've analyzed it, we've used it, we've tried it, we've experimented with it, and it seems to make the improvements we want. That may be the best approach, that we have for the moment. I would never like to think we have that there's one right way to do something. No. So what we were doing, so back to mob programming, which some people are now calling ensemble programming, and others, I think if I had a preferred name, I originally wanted to call it team programming or whole team programming. Whole team kind of based on the ideas that came from, I think, from extreme programming, but team programming. But we were using the term mob when I was doing coding dojo exercises at user groups. I loved doing them. The day I was shown how to do it, I thought, oh, I want to do this at our user group. And I probably have done now hundreds, if not thousands, of these coding dojos in my trainings, but also at user groups. And what I would do is I would introduce it as saying, let's do a little pair programming. Could somebody come down and we'll do some pair programming? And we would sit there and I would guide them using this technique I'd learned from Llewellyn Falco, which is for an idea to go from someone's head into the computer, it must go through someone else's hands. Well, that was a nice idea that worked well for me. And I had adopted it as my way of doing pair programming. Because what I found when we don't do that, it's often one person kind of coding in isolation with someone else watching and trying to interject. But as soon as we use this guideline, we now have I believe, had a better communication happening, fuller understanding being gained and stuff like that. So it worked well for me and I wanted more of it. So that's one of my key things is how do we turn up the good on what we are observing as being good? And I'm going to hold up a book right now that is nicely described in this book from Kent Beck. In the foreword, I think it's either in the foreword or in the preface, where he says, we had these practices that were working well for us. And we knew they were working well because we had a lot of experience with them. And he himself, he said, I wondered, what if we turn these all up to 10? What would happen? So I call that turn up the good. Find the things that are already good for you and turn them up. Anyways, so when I was doing these coding dojos at user groups, I would say, we'll do pair programming, and I'd bring somebody down and we would pair program with me guiding them because I'm, let's pick some simple kata. I'll guide you through it, look at what there is to learn, and we'll learn a few things. And we do this for 10 or 15 minutes. So he said, now I would say, now I want to open this out to everybody here. And there was often 10 to 20 people. And so I knew from the start that could be difficult. And it was proven to me over and over, if I didn't have some pretty strict rules about how we would interact, it became chaos. So I started making a joke. I'm going to open this out to everyone like a mob. And I was thinking in terms of a mob like this, where a bunch of people have gathered together to take care of something they didn't have the courage to do alone or didn't have the means to do alone. So when you gather all those people together, they're less afraid to accomplish the thing they need to accomplish. So I said, but we don't want to have an unruly mob. We want to have an orderly mob, a ruly mob, which means we're not just all shouting out instructions or we're all groaning or clapping or whatever. We want to keep it controlled. So we had a little technique for that, which in our rotation, the only person allowed to speak was the navigator, the one guiding the person at the keyboard. So they would have the idea to do, they would guide the person at the keyboard at the keyboard would put it in, and then we would switch turns every few minutes. And this way of doing a coding dojo made it very easy for us to do a social activity of 10 or 15 people coding at the computer. We usually found this is really just switching out the pair every few minutes. And that works really well. It's a fun way to work. And everybody that's waiting for their turn is thinking about what they would do. And then when it becomes their turn, well, the playing field might have changed. The problem they were thinking about solving may have already been solved. They're already thinking about, well, what's the next thing to do? That became the terminology, mob, just I think because of that. Because when I was first asked, there's something I want to cover, remind me if I don't, why do we even share mob programming or whatever we want to call it? And I want to cover that in a second. When we started working this way, we had already been practicing on the team we were that I was on. We were practicing using the coding dojo every Friday for 3 hours, and we would just simply take a kata, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but some exercise, a coding exercise that was intended to teach us something. Like how do you break a large object apart, or how do you refactor in small bits, or whatever. How do you get cohesiveness? How do you decouple things, and so on. Anyway, we were practicing this for 6 months, approximately, before we kind of accidentally stumbled on the way that we could actually work this way. We had been learning to pair program. We've been learning to interact well with each other. And the dojo itself kind of teaches you 3 or 4 things, because the very strict rules, we're learning how to accept instructions from someone else, which a lot of times we don't want to do. How do we share our ideas in such a way that it's understandable by the person trying to code? How do we hold our mouth shut while we're waiting for our turn? Not that we need to wait for our turn in work, but in the dojo, to wait our turn. In real work, we would probably just offer ideas whenever it's appropriate, but we need to learn how to keep our ideas in for that moment when it's appropriate, which is very different from just saying your ideas when they come to you. And so we were learning these skills of working together. I don't think any of us would have claimed we were good at working with each other before that, or even it took me a couple of years after that to get the skills I realized I needed to have. So anyways, as we were doing this, one day, we had one of the team members who had a big problem they wanted to have more people look at. And so we got together to look at it. And rather than just look at it, we started doing it as if it was a coding dojo. But we almost immediately changed the strict rules. So the mob programming idea was sort of meant as a joke, sort of meant as a way to visualize. We have a lot of people together. How do we keep it from being chaos? And so after a short amount of time, I mean, really the first day we started this, where we just started working as a team on something instead of working as a solo person or just watching what someone else was sharing with us, we realized the benefits, and those benefits were really strong right from the first day. We learned a lot. We made a lot of progress on this problem. It was a very high quality, and we were really enjoying doing it. Now, to enjoy it really means you have to get some of these skills so you're not getting frustrated all the time. And so you're not unwilling to try someone else's ideas. One of the things we were really learning was, let's try everybody's idea rather than just one person's.
And excuse me, Woody, if I may interject, just
yes, please.
Before you, I would, to me personally, mob is the perfect word to describe it. And I know people are trying to do ensemble, and
Yeah.
here's why. In my experience, I realized immediately, mob means people come and go. You're not obliged. Like ensemble is more like if you're a band of musicians and now we're
Oh,
rehearsing, and we cannot have the drummer just leave and go for a walk. But in a mob, when I'm teaching mob programming, I'm telling people, look, if you need to go out, no problem, just quietly leave and come back.
yes.
You can band and disband ad hoc.
Yeah.
And that should not degrade in any way the quality of the session. That's freedom.
Oh, yeah, that could easily improve the quality of the session.
Yeah.
So we found that as well. Almost immediately, we set aside some guidelines as to how we would work with each other. I call this a protocol, but there's probably better terms for it. The protocol for us, one thing was, nobody is forced to sit with the team. You can sit alone and work as long as you can figure out something you need to be working on. And we had we used the big visible board where we would have all of our work was up there. So if there was something you thought you could work on alone, you could go do that. Also, though, a lot of us like to take a walk to go and think. And so you're going to be alone with your brain, but you're doing something that kind of, it's like white noise in a way. You're walking, you're not needing to pay attention to anything, like if your phone is sitting there or your computer is sitting there or somebody walks up to you when you're working at your desk. So this is a way to be alone. And I think when you're walking, you're pumping a lot of blood through your brain. So you're getting maybe a little bit better use of your brain.
Have you heard this nuclear physicist? I think his name is Richard Feynman or something.
Feynman, yeah,
Feynman,
sure.
yes. They describe the way he was working was almost shocking. He would be contorting his body. Like the way he was thinking was very physical. He was not just sitting there and thinking. He was like grunting and so we think with the whole body. We are
I like that.
physical. We are, we live in a three-dimensional universe.
Yes. Well, I would love, I would make a suggestion here for everybody to at least read one book from Feynman. He's just so good. I think he's written 2 or 3 books at least. I'd have to go look. I know I've got a couple. He's really a unique individual. That's a lot of fun to
people report it was almost unpleasant to watch him work. He was very into it and kind of contorting and it almost like in pain, but actually this is the process. And like you said, maybe go for a walk, climb the tree, whatever crazy thing you do.
What you need. Yeah, I often ask in my workshops, when do your best ideas come to you? And the one that I hear most frequently is in the shower. But also the second block that's really important is, or that comes up frequently, is just before I fall asleep, just as I wake up, or in the middle of the night. So I wake up and go, oh, I know what to do. And so another one is taking a walk or riding a bike. I think taking a walk is more frequent, or running. But this is the thing. Our ideas don't come to us necessarily in a planned manner. I think we can probably improve our ability to do that. And this is one of the things. So I was really talking about the protocol we had of working together. One of the things is we don't know when our best ideas will come, but we did notice when we were sitting together, idea would build an idea very quickly. And so this got us to a good usable idea quickly. It may not be the best idea. Best ideas maybe don't exist, but so that was another one of our guidelines. So this was our protocol, was not rules. Maybe an important one I could call rule is you're not forced to be here. You can go work alone. And we noticed when somebody would leave and come back, they would almost always bring an idea back with them if they had gone off to think. But you might just need to go off and be alone for a while. I've worked with somebody who needed to be, pressure would build up in him when he was working with other people, and he just needed to go decompress because this was part of his nature.
And have you heard of Rich Hickey, the guy who invented closure?
No, not specifically. No.
I watched one of his talks, and he says he was before he did that, he was working, I think, in Texas Instruments or something, and he was famous for being the best troubleshooter like there is. Like if nobody can fix the problem, call Rich, and he's gonna troubleshoot and fix it. And he says, how did I do it? He said, not even once did I fix the problem in front of the computer.
Ah,
He says, I would look at it, blah, blah, and then I'll go for a walk. I'll go to the beach or something, and and then the idea pops into my head, and then I wouldn't act on it. I would sleep on it.
yeah.
And if
And it might take time,
yeah,
right? It's like the ideas come, sleeping on it is a good example. I don't know the science of it, but our brain kind of clears out some of the things that aren't important and helps, and our brain can think about things, I guess subconsciously.
and then he says,
So,
if when I sleep on it, if the next day it's still there and strong, and I know it's going to work.
yeah, yeah.
Sometimes
Oh,
it
I
just
love it.
fails.
I love it.
It just goes, no, this was a blind date or something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, but we can talk a little bit more later on these other physical aspects of our work. Not everything is cerebral enough.
That's right. Well, so the protocols that we came up with were just to make it easy for us to interact with each other. So, one of my philosophies, if that's the right word, but one of my guidelines I follow is, can we make it easy? So it's not a matter of always having the work in front of us being difficult for us. We can spend some time saying, how can we make this difficult work easier? And a lot of times it really means automating stuff that we currently are using up too much of our brain power doing that a computer would be better doing. Another way is to learning how to listen to each other, which I'm not particularly good at, but I'm better now than I was 10 years ago. Learning how to better explain ourselves. So going to the whiteboard, really turned out to be a valuable thing for us. I remember one specific instance of this. We were working on a project where it became clear to us that there was a repeating pattern of the nature of the work that was being done in this particular project. And we all looked at it as a team, and then we said, well, let's go to the whiteboard, and we started making post-it notes of all these things, what was in common with them. And we finally identified that it was really the idea of a transaction. And so then we said, okay, which one of these do we want to work on that it's be simple, at least it looks simple right now, and give us as much understanding about what these transactions are as possible. So doing it at the whiteboard, we could gather a lot of stuff. The beauty of the whiteboard is that the stuff remains there. We don't have to explain it over and over and over. That thing I said 5 minutes ago, you don't have to say, that thing I said where we do this and then we do that. There's a note for it, or there's a little diagram or whatever. And as we build on that, we can easily move things around. And this allows us to focus. Where are these things grouped? How are they grouped? We can write a theme for it. Are these things separate from each other? In what way are they separate from each other? And maybe within the bigger theme, we would find, okay, there's a difference between these. Let's separate those. I was watching not a study, but a program about trying to identify, they call it the scientific atom. Atom as in Adam and Eve. Who is the male that all male in the planet have the same mutation. So when you can find that, like this group has that mutation in something else, this one has that mutation in something else, but those two something else's are different. You can say, okay, they came from that earlier person. And I don't know how much they really know about it, but they can get pretty close to who did we all come from in a way. And if we find that person, we could give him a big talking to, right?
I don't know if I even want to know. Come on.
That's right. But I think the point being that if we can think in a more visual manner, matter of fact, that's something to bring up here, I think, with mob programming. One of the things that's really important is that we have 5 or 6 brains gathered together. So this means, let's say you and I are working together on something. I've really, in a lot of ways, or at least in a lot of areas, doubled my brain's capacity by simply working with you. This conversation is an example of that. If we add another brain, we're maybe not tripling, but we are somehow advancing the amount of brain power, but we need to learn how to work across those brains.
Or maybe we're even tenfold improved.
Yeah, I don't know how much of that's right. It could be a huge improvement because it's removing the blind spots there's of course this thing of the blind spot bias, even is that we think we don't have the biases that someone else has. The blind spots that we have, we can't even see. We don't know they exist. They're the unknown unknowns because of our own biases.
We all have them.
Yeah.
Everybody has them.
So the protocols that we need to make it easy for us to interact with each other. And the whiteboard is a way to do that. I read a study. I often read books that refer to studies so that it's easier for me to understand them, rather than me reading the studies, which I often have a heck of a time getting through. And I read a study that showed how we gather information into our brain and how it becomes solidified, which it often shouldn't, but we allow it to happen. So how we get information in includes, reading. It includes watching a video. It includes talking about something. It includes writing something about it. It includes drawing it. It includes having somebody else draw it. So these are all different ways that the information can get into us, and the more different ways the information can get into us, the easier it is for us to comprehend it and use it. Is that really true? And if it is, how can we get other things involved? Smell is involved. Taste is involved. Senses are involved.
You are driving to something really significant. Have you watched Brett Victor? Does that name ring a bell?
No, I don't know.
Now, Brett Victor is talking exactly what you're talking about. And this is to do with thought representation. How do we represent thoughts and concepts?
Ah.
So he starts from, basically we evolved as hunter-gatherers, right? Or something like that. And now we have faculties to deal with this world. How do we survive, right? And now we are equipped to interpret certain things. So he says, there was a point in time, not that long ago, where people represented data as in tabular format. So everything was like just table of numbers. On the other hand, people like to draw maps. So they were of territories, like this is the map of this city and map of this. And then one person, I forgot who the scientist was, he combined the two and he created the graph, which a thought representation did not exist before. Another example is Roman numerals representing our thoughts about numbers. Well, you cannot do arithmetic with Roman numerals. You have to go to abacus. But Arabic numerals, all of a sudden, a different representation gives us the power to do arithmetic, and on and on. Yep. So what you're talking about, how you repackage your representation of your thought gives you superpowers.
Oh, I like that. So let's bring that to the combining of the brains. So if we go to the whiteboard and I start drawing something and saying it, and somebody else is taking some notes about it, we are getting different ways of getting that info into us. So I often put it this way: we're not trying to get agreement. We're trying to get understanding. Now, we can never get perfect understanding, and we can agree on something, but it's not about the agreement. It's about exploring, about getting the understanding. So if this is one thing I really love, is that Wheel's laws. Wheel was a professor in, and I don't know how to say his name. Somebody can tell me someday. He was a professor in Finland, and he wrote a set of laws. And one of them, the fundamental Wheel's law, is communication always fails except by accident. I think that's his fundamental law. And then he has 5 or 6 or maybe 8 or more corollaries or whatever to that. I really like that, because what we then, if that's true, it may not be true, but if that's true, what are we going to do about it? And this is one of the things I really like about mob programming. But I also like this about test-driven development. These things are closely interconnected. Yeah. The idea that we can get an understanding when we prove that we understood, rather than, so if I were to ask you right now, do you understand what I'm talking about? And you were to respond, yes, I do, or no, I don't. We haven't proven anything.
It's an illusion of agreement, right?
It's a yes. And so with mob programming, if I'm navigating and the whole team is there, the point of having a navigator, that's somebody guiding the process for the moment, is so that we are all coming along and staying in the same context, as opposed to when we work alone, we're working separately. Our contexts are by definition different contexts. Even if we're working on the same thing at the same time, if we're not communicating, we're not staying in the same context. Now, staying in the same context isn't necessarily a bonus, but it's good when we're working. It's worked well for us. So when we stay in the same context and we all are sort of getting an understanding of what we're trying to do, even if we don't agree that this is the right thing to try, this is a very powerful way to help limit or lessen the effects of what Will was observing. If we say, let's try this, and then we try it and we go, wait, that's not what I meant, we immediately realized we didn't understand. And so we can get that understanding by trying the things, correcting what we're saying, going to the whiteboard. We need to find these techniques to make sure we are understanding each other.
And that's what I'm trying to really push hard. And people find it a little bit surprising. My thesis, or the thing I'm insisting on, is that collaboration is superior to communication. And I know this is a loaded, but you described it perfectly, what the difference is.
Yeah.
Collaboration is the situation where whatever we are trying to communicate, excuse me, we actually try it, see if it works or doesn't. If I'm sending you an email and we are communicating, email is not, you cannot try it, right? It's a dead letter on paper.
Right. And
then you may reply, yeah, Alex, okay, this sounds really good. I agree, blah, blah. But do we really understand each other?
That's right.
It is a low, what's the word? It has low nutritional value compared to.
There you go. Yeah, I like that.
Low
nutritional value.
Because, there's this saying that do not argue about the code when you're mobbing, argue in code, right? I'm like, Woody, I don't like the code you wrote, and no, just go and change it and see now if it works, right?
Yeah. So the nice thing about test-driven development is we can get to a working solution for any micro bit of this code we want to do, and then experiment with it.
Yeah.
Right? We're not at the end when we've gotten a test to pass. That's the beginning of where we can really think about the thing. Patterns start evolving and we start seeing the patterns. We can't see the patterns if we don't see enough. Like I gave the example of the transactions earlier. Once we start going, wait a second, these transactions are similar. What we look for, in programming often is if we see things that are similar, is there a pattern? And once we see the pattern, we can abstract things into a different level of thinking. And so it's good. It's a good thing to look for that. It doesn't mean you have to do it everywhere all the time, but it's when we, in test-driven development, once we've got a test to pass is where the really good thinking can start. We can try out an alternative solution. We can try several alternatives, and we don't need to stop once we get the test passing. Sometimes it's sufficient. We could just say good enough for that. But sometimes we'll go, it looks like we can make some good improvements here. And maybe we need to write some more tests that will help us think about the other tests to write. So that's a good combination there. The whiteboard and test-driven development. Yeah. So test-driven development is a powerful thinking tool.
In my experience, I want to really pick your brain on this. I cannot envision how would I do mob programming without test driven?
Yeah.
Because then it turns, the risk is it turns into a brainstorming session. Be it on
it could. Yeah, I could see that.
But this harness of tests really kind of sharpens the focus. And the mob is not kind of, flailing or, losing momentum. Because as you say, tests either fail or pass, and we keep going. Yeah. And this is really gluing everyone's attention to the screen. And furthermore, what I really find as the best secret sauce for really effective mobbing is mutation testing. I don't know if you tried that. So we go make changes to the code. Okay, some tests fail. Okay, fix it. All tests pass. Hurrah. Okay, hold it. Let's run mutation testing. What's this? We have like 15 surviving mutants. and we were applauding. And then the mob becomes even more hungry for the prey. And they're like a pack of wolves, like, okay, we got to kill them mutants. and then the brain starts really churning. I've seen that the wheels start,
Yes.
okay, how do we kill these mutants? It is a very powerful glue to the mob. And then when usually the session ends with all mutants killed, there's this catharsis. There's this feeling of like, I can't wait to do this again, right? It is this job satisfaction, this kind of feeling that, yes, we did something useful here. And then people are glad to come back to the next session, right?
I've not done mutation testing specifically. I think I've watched some talks on it. I assume that can be automated to a great degree as well. Yeah. So that seems, so anything we can do, like theory testing and other things that are outside of just direct unit testing. Tracks.
Like you said, it gives you a jolt, right? When you think, okay, we're really great, we did a fantastic job, and then something impartial comes along. Not some guy saying, I disagree, but the machine is telling you, well, not so fast. This is actually still broken. This gives a juice to the mob to rise to the occasion and say, okay, well, I'm gonna fix this. We're gonna fix this.
So that the idea of mutation testing is to show us where we're really missing some testing. Is that sort of the idea, that we need to think about things we weren't thinking about?
The idea is to say, okay, you think you have, your expectations have been taken care of, but actually they haven't been, because there's some areas over there that no matter what happens, your expectations are okay with that. And that's not solid. You should be blowing the whistle. If something changes over there and you have all your like sentinel, all your oracle saying, no, everything's cool, you can go live. Well, but how about that, right? It's a blind spot. It's unveiling the blind spot.
I like that.
And then the team goes like, oh, hold it. Yeah. And now they become worried. And this gives you, right? This gives you the fuel now to jump in and say, okay, I'm going to fix all that. And that ability to go in and fix it as a mob is fantastic, because now, tide rises all boats and everybody in the mob feels great about themselves.
Right.
And it's not like this guy fix it, but that guy fix it. It's we all.
Let's add to that. I think I've been on projects where week by week and some after a while, day by day, people are more and more worn out. They're more demoralized. They're less interested. They're starting to look for other jobs because everything just is so bad. That's because we're not getting small successes all along the way. It even grows to the degree sometimes where we've stopped making progress at all. And so I think that part of working on a team is the whole point to me after we start working this way is we were now taking one story to work on and completing it. We weren't going, oh, I'm blocked on this today, because the whole team's sitting together. First of all, we weren't getting blocked, but even more, when we found something that was blocking us, that was a signal to us that there's information that should be on this team that isn't on this team. That means we're either missing somebody or we've got knowledge we need to add to our knowledge. In fact, when I worked in companies where the team couldn't produce the software that management was wanting to have, this is a failure of management, not a failure of the software development team. Because management, and let's be careful here, I'm not about management like did we buy enough computers or do we have a desk space for this person? I'm talking about management, about the decisions about what should the software do, how are we going to break it up and deliver it? Are we going to try and do it as a whole? Those kinds of decisions. They're part of the software team, but they act as if they're two separate things. So I think when we, if we're failing, first of all, we're expecting the organization to be capable of doing something they're not yet capable of doing. Can we learn fast enough in this particular environment to be able to do that? Maybe not. We decided to do something we weren't really yet prepared for. And we can say all along, we have to rise up to this challenge. but that doesn't mean we can rise up to this challenge.
Oh, yeah.
So having all the techniques and the practices in place that make it easy for us to move quickly into learning the things we don't yet know, that's what the organizations really should be focused on, is building those capabilities, not just throwing the challenges in front of us or saying we need to do this, our competitors are doing it, or here's a new regulation we need to quickly solve. Yeah, maybe not.
And
In
you
fact,
know,
every
that's
one of those scenarios is different than what we probably want to believe they are. Yeah.
and you know, Woody, that's the value proposition of extreme programming, is the giving you options. For example, I was involved in situations where we get hired and we're working with stakeholders, and with extreme programming in small batches, we are constantly debugging not only the code, we're debugging the expectations, the specifications.
Yes.
Right. And then I start pushing hard and like, oh, now what? And now what happens now? And when this happens, and eventually sometimes you get to the point where the stakeholders become annoyed and they're like, I don't know, you're the developer, you figure it out. And right there, you know that this project is not going anywhere. Like you say, maybe we are not ready for this. And now I give you the option to bail. And I'm being transparent. I'm like, you know what? I cannot automate something that you don't really know what the rules are. It's not possible. This is not magic. This is not, abracadabra. This is engineering. So if you cannot tell me what the rule is now, this is a dead end. And I tell you openly, and no hard feelings. And sometimes it saves you and others a lot of money, time, grief. So this is a great transparent practice. And the mob is the same, right? You openly discuss things. You say, you know what, guys, this doesn't seem to be going anywhere. Why don't we just call it a day?
That's right.
Something else to do.
So knowing when to stop sometimes is really critical. I want to tell a story of how this happened in an organization I was in. It seems like now it must be over 15 years ago, and it was some side work. I was often taking on, I'd have my day job, didn't provide a lot of mental stimulation. I would take on extra little projects. And I was working on something that I would go work with this guy every weekend for 6 or 10 hours. And he loved free code. If he could find something some code on the internet that would solve a problem he thought we had, or gave a feature he thought that we needed, he would bring that code in and we'd put it in the code base, and then it would become part of our project. And that was usually never any good. It was always full of bugs and other problems, and written in such a way where it was no testing, and it was impossible to get it working well. Well, we had one of those things, and after about 12 weeks, almost every week there was a bug of some sort that came out of this chunk of code. And somebody would fix it, and that would just introduce another bug, and then somebody would fix that, and then it would become apparent there was some other bug, because sometimes a bug hides that there are other bugs, and sometimes the fixing of something causes the other bugs. So after about 12 weeks, I went to him and said, look, this was free code. As of right now, we spent 12 times 2 hours on average to fix this free code. So let's just say it was $50 an hour that we were paying for a programmer. And so we've spent, over 12 weeks, we've spent way more than we would have probably by just writing this ourselves. So I said, look, you and I, let's take the time, let's set aside the time, and we will write this ourselves. Now, I don't know much about what this thing's doing. You're the business expert. So you're going to pair program with me. This was way before mob programming. A non-programmer and a programmer pairing, which is one of my favorite things. So we sat together and I said, well, what does this have to do? And he starts rattling off, okay, give me one example of one of those things. And I put it into a test. And then I coded for that test. He goes, wait, that's no good because we have to have this too. Well, we'll write a test for that. And we kept writing. After about 2 hours, we completed this code. We went through all the scenarios he could think of, and they were all in his brain because he understood the business use inside and out. And I didn't have to. That was one of the things when I really started realizing pair programming is so valuable, is when I realized I'm not wearing out my brain by the end of the day, trying to think of every possibility or everything I need to think about. I'm now sharing that load. He's doing the business part. I'm doing the simple coding and testing part. And there we go. At the end of that day, we complete, well, it's 2 hours. we spent the same amount of average time of fixing one of the bugs. We put that code into use, and I just put it in where it would alternate between the two chunks of code. And we had analytics in there. So when a bug happened here, it would go into it would log it. And when a bug happened here, it would log it. The new code we wrote, which served all of his expectations, never had a bug. The code that we got for free continued to have those bugs. Yeah. And after a few weeks, I said, okay, do you want to keep the old code or do you want to use the new code? It changed him in a way, because after that, he was much more open to working more directly. But just the point being, yeah, free code or not, we've got to figure out a better way to prove that the thing's doing what we want to do. I want to point something out. We didn't write the tests for the whole thing. We wrote the tests for each little thing. You still need to test the whole thing. But boy, if you've written those micro tests for each little thing, proving they work well together is pretty easy. Yeah. And so this was powerful to me. And I think it was at that time that I realized I don't want to work without test-driven development, but also I don't want to work without a pair. Because when you put that together, you get this super, it's not a, double capability. It's more, it's like you were saying, maybe it's not 10 times, but boy, when we work as an individual, we need to keep a lot more going on in our head than when we work as a pair. And boy, this just expands out when we work as a mob with 5 or 6 people. The amount of stuff we have to have going on in our own head reduces. I no longer have to be thinking about how am I going to convince the database person that we need to make a change to the database, because they've actually seen it now, and they probably come up before I even mention it. They might say, oh, it looks like we're going to have to add something new to this table, or we're going to have to add another index over in this area. I don't need to be thinking about all that because we're all working in the same context. We're able to share that, what I like to think of as sharing the cognitive load. Now, I know I got off topic, but
it's right on topic, because you perfectly illustrated how much more powerful collaboration is over communication. Because communication is opening tickets and asynchronous sending. Okay, assigning tasks. Okay, you go over there and do this, and you go over there and do that, right? And then we have the overhead of having now to integrate all that, and we have merge conflicts and things are not working because we were merely communicating.
Yes. So Joshua Karievsky, Joshua, he wrote the book Refactoring to Patterns, and he once said, mob programming is the continuous integration of ideas. Yeah. And I love that, because this is what happens when you work alone. You come up with ideas, you experiment with them, you become enamored by them. You now want to defend them when you're sharing them with someone else. And then somebody else says, oh, but I think we have a better way. And now we have to have that conversation outside of work. So if I was designing something that's going to interact with something someone else is doing, but we've come up to 2 different patterns that we want to use. Now we have to have conversations about whose should we use. And what I found with mob programming is those ideas bubble up. We try them both. We pick the one that seems to be best. When they both have about the same results, we can flip a coin or just say, use that one, use this one, it won't matter. And even better, later on when we go, this didn't work so well, let's try something else, or go back and try that first thing. Unmaking the decision is really easy. Whereas if you've made a decision based on people signing off on stuff, and then you need to go and make a change later, you're really stuck. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's there's an ugly expression, but I think it illustrates it well. It's very ugly, and I don't like using it, but they call it cattle, not pets. Oh. And you know what's meant by that. It's like what you described. If I go and I have my pet, I create my pet and I give it a name, and don't you dare, challenge it. And you have your own pet, and now we have to struggle. But cattle ranchers, they just it's anonymous bunch of ideas. It's kind of ugly, but it illustrates this approach where authorless coding, it does not have an author assigned to it. It just, and to me, the mob, ideally, or the whole team, is all people who have skin in the game.
Yes.
Whoever you are.
Yep.
You don't have to be technical. You don't have to be business.
That's exactly right. Well, so the example I gave earlier of me working with the person who wasn't really a coder, they were really the business owner in this case. When we had the free code that was broken all the time. I then didn't have to have all that knowledge in my brain, but if he had just done a knowledge dump and said, here's the things this needs to do and handed it to me, I'm still missing all the business why. All I've been given is, here's how I want this to work. When we actually sit together and they get to see this, they start considering things they could never have thought of before.
Yeah.
One of my best examples of that was about that same time, I was working on a project where, I won't go into details, but we ended up organizing ourselves. There were 6 people out of 80 or 100 people in this project, and we were given a specific thing to work on that was really troubling to everyone else. They were not having success with it. And so we completely changed the way we worked. And you know what? It's funny that I had this book sitting on my desk right now, but we took the ideas out of this book from Mary Poppendieck, who I would say everyone in software development, whether you're a developer or a tester or a database expert or a manager or a product owner, should read that book. But we took some of the simple ideas. It's really just a grab bag of ideas of how to make things easier. And we eliminated the things that weren't bringing us value. And we ended up working in little groups of 3, a business analyst, a tester, and a programmer. And so the 3 of us could sit down together and make rapid progress on something that when we separated it, which introduced queuing or waiting and inventory and other wastes, the wastes of communication, the wastes of transportation and all those things, we made rapid progress. We were able to make progress over a 3-month period that everybody else working on this previously couldn't get in 3 years. And this 3 months of huge, rapid moving forward was really powerful because the quality was really high. Previous to this, any bug fix or change introduced another bug. We had no, I like to think of it as recidivism. We had no code creating bugs. We actually fixed the bugs without introducing new bugs. And part of that was we were introducing tests for everything we were doing. In this was code, a couple million lines of code that didn't have any tests. It wasn't written with tests in place. There were automated tests, but they were of the old-fashioned GUI style tests that could probably prove that maybe 5% of the application, had some consistency, and that was about it. All the rest of it was no way to, you can't go through all those scenarios with the handful of GUI style tests.
The most frustrating, or I don't know how to call it, and I'm coming from my personal experience, is this knee-jerk reaction when you introduce the concept, you even start talking about to people who never heard of mob programming, for example, that automatically, and I'm guilty of the same knee-jerk reaction, automatically you're thinking, oh man, oh boy, this is such a waste. So we have now 10 people just working on one thing. How are we utilizing our resources? If I'm the boss, I'm paying 10 salaries or whatever, hourly rate.
Right.
I'm not gonna let them all of them sit in the room, work on just one thing. I wanna have them work in parallel on 10 things. This is how we maximize our, utilization. And this is so wrong, but this is so hard. It's so hard to explain why is it so wrong and why is it the exact opposite. And I'm so frustrated with people automates. Oh no, that's out of the question. You can forget about it. And same as with TDD. What you want me to write tests first? This is so wasteful.
Well, if we've got a whole bunch, let's say we're going to invite our friends over because we're going to move, and we rented a big truck, and now we got to move the couch, the bed, large furniture items, maybe the refrigerator. So we say, okay, you move the bed, you move the couch, and you move the refrigerator, and then we'll be done quicker. Well, no, we've got 3 people all struggling to move something that one person's going to have trouble with. Now, if you're a professional mover, you probably have some techniques for doing that, but we want to do it without injury. We want to do it with all different skill levels. So yeah, we learn how to collaborate in moving each piece rather than and then separating. We don't separate the people like, okay, if you're going to move the couch, then cut it into 3 pieces, and then carry each piece out. Now we just need to put them back together. Well, that's not going to work. So this is the thing. There's one prominent question that I almost always would get when I would give an introduction to mob programming. How can this possibly be productive with 5 people working on one thing?
Yeah.
And they will phrase it. So I started asking, when I would get that question, and I would get it every time, and I didn't know how to answer it. At first, I would just say, I don't know how we can be productive, but we are getting a lot of stuff done.
Yeah.
I don't know why, how this is doing it. I just know that by doing these things, we're getting great results. It would be worthwhile experimenting with it. That's the way I think of it. Well, so I started thinking about it. We did a lot of research, reading, studying, and trying to figure it out. And one of the things I would do is ask the person who would bring that question up after the talk. They'd ask the question, then after the talk, I'd find them and say, hey, you asked about productivity. Tell me, how do you know what you're doing is productive? How do you know that separating everything is productive? What is it you use that proves that? And they would often say, well, where's the research that proves mob programming is better? And I say, well, first of all, it doesn't have to be better. It just has to be no worse. Maybe it gives us benefits that we don't get, but we're missing some other benefits. I don't care. But this is the thing. There is no research that proves that separating people is better, and yet everybody's doing it.
Yeah.
There is no research. So there was research that was done about pair programming by Laurie Williams, quite a bit of research that kind of indicates that, yeah, pair programming is probably better. And we can extrapolate off of that. I do so in my book a little bit that I wrote with Kevin Meadows. He had a whole chapter he wrote about, well, let's take that research that was on pair programming and then, imagine it was more than, what would it take to make it equal to working solo? But this is the thing. When we work separately, we are blocked by a lot of things that slow us down. We just don't recognize it. So when I would ask that person, what do you mean when you say, how could this be productive? How can it be productive when people work separately? Well, it's because I have 5 people working on 5 different things. Well, what good is having 5 people work on 5 different things? I want to get something done, and not just something. I want to get the better things, the best things, the most meaningful things done. So how can we speed up getting something done? How can we work more directly from start to finish? And this is what we would do with mob programming. We're working on one thing. We take one thing, we work on it start to finish. It gets done rapidly. Everybody stays more engaged. It's more interesting. It can be more fatiguing, so we have to be careful to not allow it to become fatiguing. But you can see we are now actually seeing the progress of getting things done instead of the progress that's measured by how many hours did you work on it, because nothing's gotten done yet. Or is this the right thing to have gotten done? The brilliant thing about getting little bits done is that you can now learn, was that worth doing? And that helps inform us about the next thing to work on, which we don't get when we have 5 or 6 things being worked on, but none of them are yet done. We can only make judgments based on what does one individual think, the one person working on this part and the one person working on that part. We're just getting feedback from that. I want to get feedback from its actual use.
Yeah, and it all boils down to what people are tracking.
What are they tracking?
That's right. For example, when I teach TDD, and I'm like TDD guy, right? Everywhere I show up and just TDD, and then people push back, right? And they're like, well, this doesn't make sense, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, this depends on what you are tracking. And I always ask, when programmers tell me, no, I don't feel like doing that, that's going to slow everything down. I'm like, okay, can I ask you a pointed question? Sure. How much time on average are you spending debugging? Oh,
yes.
A lot. Well, is anybody tracking that? No. Are you asking your manager, excuse me, can I spend the rest of the afternoon debugging? You're not asking anyone, you're just doing it.
That's right.
Why do you have to ask the manager if you could write a test? I don't understand that sentiment. Where is this coming from? You are a professional and you're debugging because you think this is how you do your job. Why not just say, I'm writing micro tests before I write the code because this is how I do my job? Why do you need, of course, if you're going to go to the manager and say, hey, I want to spend some extra time writing the test first, they're going to say, no, we don't have money for that. But it's not their call. at the end of the day.
That's right.
And
Well, you know,
similarly,
I have a,
yeah, go
I
ahead.
have a great example of that.
Please.
I worked at a place where at some point the management, the direct manager over the developers said, you're not allowed to do test-driven development because you have to write twice as much code to get your work done. And I don't want to pay you to write twice as much code. Totally, to me, a fallacy, incorrect way of thinking. However, I really didn't know how to write this code without the tests. So I just kept writing the code. I just no longer checked the code, the tests. I continue writing the tests. I just didn't check it into the source control system. So we were losing one of the main benefits that others could be learning from and using those tests. But this was the end result of it. We were working on iterations. They weren't really doing anything agile yet. We were getting to the point where we were probably going to, and we did. But at that time, we weren't. We started, when I first joined the company, we were doing 2-week iterations. By this time, we were doing 3-month iterations. You probably have seen that pattern before. We didn't have enough time to get everything done in the 2 weeks, so let's add another week, and let's add another week. It's like, there's the signal here. If you do that 2 or 3 times and you still don't have enough time to get everything done, it's not the iterations, it's how you're choosing what to get done. Here's the thing. At the end of each iteration, my code wasn't coming back from the testers as needing fixes, because almost all the stuff they would have tested for, I had already tested for automatically. Now, my work was not getting done as fast as some of the other developers. But once we got into the test cycle, I was sitting with nothing to do. So I was mostly helping others rewrite and fix the code that was getting the broken bits. So we're not calculating everything going on here when we say it's slower. I did find over time that I was actually turning out, because as you know, the patterns in the project turned out, I was now coding as much or more than the other developers. So if each of us were assigned 2 objects to write the code for, or whatever, however they broke things up, I now could take on more work. So as my tests got fuller and fuller, and the nature of what I was doing was better understood by me, I caught up and maybe even got ahead of some of the other developers. And I'm an average programmer. By no means am I a brilliant programmer. Yeah.
Most of us are, let's be honest. But you see,
absolutely.
Yeah, the command and control people, if we can call them that. I don't want to cast any aspersions, but you know, if I'm the boss and I put $10 million of my own money, of course I want to control the situation. I'm not going to say, guys, just go nuts and just do whatever you feel like, right? So this is a natural propensity for me to like try to understand what's going on, right? But like you say, the thing is, what am I really tracking the important thing? Like, you know, I'm not tracking the time they're spending on debugging, which is not productive. I'm not getting any. If you spend 5 hours debugging, the paying boss is not getting anything out of it, right? It's a wasted time, basically. Same is with, if 5 people are working separately, you can keep track of how busy they are, and that's easy to measure. But what is it telling you? Nothing. Are you keeping track of all the queues and loops and wait times and transport costs? You're not. You're not measuring that. So therefore, you're not aware of the waste. This is the problem, right?
Yeah.
And we have to change that so that people become aware. Wait a minute. When I scatter gather, you know, the scatter gather model that they're talking about, this is costing me a lot of money, and the quality is degrading.
So maybe a good way to wrap this whole thing up is to realize that we are still, not just you and me, but our whole industry is still in the infancy stages of figuring out how best to approach software development. There's a lot of models. We can look at how other types of endeavors have been managed, and I could easily point to the book Peter Drucker's Essentials, the Essential Peter Drucker, which is a gathering of, I think, a lot of articles or chapters he's written, where he talks about, you know, how different industries are different ways. I love Peter Drucker. I like what he writes. I don't necessarily agree with everything he says, but one of the important things he says is that much of what we call, at least it's attributed to him, much of what we call management consists in making it hard for people to get their work done. And so if that's true, and I kind of think it is, whether it comes from Drucker or not, if that's true, then what we need to start figuring out is, how do we make it where management isn't making it difficult for people to get their work done. And I would put it a little slightly different, making it difficult for people to be effective in their work. Much of what we consider management just makes it difficult for people to be effective in their work. And if that's true, what are we going to do about it? That's something for people to think about. I don't have any real answers. In fact, I think in my consulting, which I'm mostly giving training on mob programming, but I do other things too. Mostly what I think I'm trying to do is help people realize there's stuff we need to learn about. How do we expose it? And how do we go about learning it? I can't tell you in your organization what you need to learn about or what's missing, but you can figure that out. And so that's what I try to do, is help people, guide people to figuring out how are we going to learn what we need to be paying attention to. And then that implies we need to get good at paying attention. And so that's what you were talking about, the right things. What should we be paying attention to, and how do we go about doing it?
Yeah, that's brilliant. We need to do that. But the question I have for you at this moment, I've been in this industry for 31 years, software.
Oh, you're still a kid, yeah.
Still, yeah. I can easily understand why if I put my boss hat on and I'm financing this whole operation, I can understand why do I behave the way I do, and I make it more difficult for people to work, because it's, I know Tim Ottinger, I think he recently wrote an article or Twitter feed where he said, the whole intention with all these processes around software is to prevent software from being released.
Yeah.
You just stop it. Why? Because we are casting a suspicious eye on the change. We're like, whoa, we've been burned so badly. I don't trust this change. And I can buy that sentiment, because yes, on average, we know that the batting average is like, yeah, there's trouble brewing on the horizon. If I let this through, God knows, I get my middle of the night call, everything is blowing up and everything's on fire.
That's right.
But are you saying that also in other industries that are more mature, it's the same situation, that management trying to make it less effective or efficient for people, or is it only in software?
Oh, so Drucker's heyday was sort of before most of the extreme growth in software development. I don't know when he passed away, probably 2005 or 8 or something like that. But his career spans back way back.
Yeah.
So a lot of the writings that he did cover stuff in the 60s and the 70s, but it's every industry. So think back to any job, anybody in this audience, whoever's listening to this, any job you've ever had, and you will find things where it was making it difficult for you to get your work done, or to make improvements, or to be effective. And I've seen it over and over again. So
is there an explanation for that?
Well, this
like in software, I can give you the explanation, but I can't.
This is about those biases, in my opinion. So when we think, well, okay, first of all, what is the goal, or what is the motivation of management and managers themselves? Well, it looks like I just froze. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. You just, I don't know.
Maybe okay, my image is froze, so I'm going to keep going. I don't know what's
getting recorded. No worries. No matter.
Okay, so what is the motivation of management? Then we need to think, and I'm using my hands to indicate something. Can you see me moving my hands?
No, you're still frozen, but
okay, so
going, doesn't
here's the thing. There are at least 2 levels, and I think there's 3 or 4 levels within any organization that has more than just a few people. And at what you might think of as the executive level, which has very little to do with how the work is done or how effective the work is being done. It has more to do with the outward appearance of the organization to the world in general. Can we get the funding we need? Can we increase revenue for our stockholders or owners and things like that? And there's a lot more to it than that. Individual motivations of those people at that level. When I'm done with this, can I jump my career into an even bigger, better thing? And so on. So there's a lot different going on. The level down at the bottom where work is actually being done has a different motivation. And so any one individual, so I've spoken with many managers who will say something like, people are not very motivated. I want to learn how to get them more motivated. you mentioned Tim Ottinger a few minutes ago, and he used to tell kind of a joke, but I'm not sure if it was really a joke. He said, well, what do you really want out of your employees? And this manager he was talking with said, well, I want them to work harder. They're not working hard enough. He said, that's easy with programmers. Let's just remove some of the keys off the keyboard. It will make it much harder for them to work. So they'll now have to work a lot harder. So we don't really want to make people work harder. What we want to do is make it easier for them to get their work done. So anyways, so because the motivations are different, and looking across the divide, the people in the middle there who are trying to manage the work, and then they need to be answering to the people, the executives up above, what is it that what is the stories that we need to tell? I think that part of this is somebody who's risen up in management in a company has usually done that because they go along with or are happy to live within the status quo, which almost completely destroys our ability to really get the advances we need. So in Peter Drucker talking about this, and I've not yet found the direct quote of him saying that. I found a book written by someone else that quoted him as having saying that was written in 1976. So when I was still pretty much a young man. Yeah, here's the thing. If this is true, what are we going to do about it? That's the way I like to approach these things. So when somebody says, I don't want you doing unit tests because that's just being wasteful. Well, why do they think that that's true? They're under a deadline to get something done, and then they want to tell you how to think and how to act. Well, if you took any two athletes, let's say they were, in the US, we have pitchers, and we taught both of them to pitch using the exact same techniques and the exact same training, they wouldn't become the best themselves they could be, because each person's joints, the length of their arm, the length of each part of their arm, the way their hand's constructed is different than the other person. And so we need to find out how to let each person find their own excellence. Maybe Tom Peters is really good on a little quote from Tom Peters. Tom, he wrote the In Search of Excellence book 40 years ago or whatever. He says, excellence isn't something we plan. Excellence is what you do in the next 5 minutes. I think that's not an exact quote. But you know what? I know I'm online here. I'm going to put in Tom Peters next 5 minutes and get the exact quote.
I like it already.
Here we go. So I don't know what happened. My picture froze, and you're going to need to learn. You're going to need to live with that.
No problem, Woody. I can hear you perfectly. Hopefully it will come back. It happened to me before, but then all of a sudden the picture comes back, starts moving. I don't know why.
Yes. So Tom Peters, excellence is the next 5 minutes. He says, excellence is not an aspiration. Excellence is what we do in the next 5 minutes.
Wow. Yeah.
Now, none of these things are meant to be like commandments. Yeah. It's not like Tom Peters or Peter Drucker or whatever are gurus, or that they're gods or something, but that just gives us something to think about, something worth thinking about.
Yeah, it's like putting a mirror in front of you and like look at yourself, see what's going on.
So Peter Drucker, in talking about the problems in management, he often covers many different fields. And he's pretty good at saying, look, it's not the same in every company in the same field. Each company's different. We cannot deal with them as if each one is the same, and on and on and on. Yeah.
That's the paradox of, if we talk in global sense, there's always this kind of a difference between East and West.
Yes.
And for example, the American dream, an American model is individualism and individual freedoms and pursuit of happiness and all that. But that's an ideal.